I'm Dr. Vanessa Sinclair, and this is Rendering Unconscious. My guest today is Amy Gaeta, a PhD candidate in English at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. She takes a transdisciplinary approach by bringing together critical disability studies, feminist science and technology, and visual cultural studies to understand the present and prospective roles of AI, automation, and robots. Her dissertation, Drone Life, a feminist cryptanalysis of the human, examines positive effects toward drones to theorize how drones are changing what it means to be human. Her next project examines AI's role in the treatment of mental illness and cognitive disabilities within the global mental health crisis. Amy Gaeta is also a poet. Follow her on social media at Twitter at Gaeta Amy. That's at GAETAAMY. And visit her website aegaeta.wixsite.com. Links to everything can be found in the text accompanying this episode. If you're listening to this on the Rendering Unconscious podcast stream, please know there is a video of this conversation at YouTube. Just look for Rendering Unconscious Podcast on Trapart Film's YouTube channel. That's TRAPART Film at YouTube. Rendering Unconscious is also a book. Rendering Unconscious, Psychoanalytic Perspectives, Politics, and Poetry. From Trapart Books, 2019. For more, please visit our publisher's website, trapart.net. That's TRAPART.net. You can support the podcast by visiting our Patreon, patreon.com/VANESSA23CARL. Your support is greatly appreciated. For more information, you can also visit my website, drvanessasinclair.net, or the podcast main website, renderingunconscious.org. Links to everything can be found in the text accompanying this episode.
When he says fuck it, we're doing it live. Bill O'Reilly, it's Bill O'Reilly. That's the only time I'll quote Bill O'Reilly in my life. Only time.
I love it.
Yeah.
So is there any particular place that you would like to begin?
Let me think. First, I think it's probably good to just give an overview of the multiple things that I'm regularly doing, which would, I guess, constitute my work. Because I have kind of like a expansive array of things that I'm always doing. And they're all interconnected. It's just, it seems very abstract, but I think the kind of psychological elements that I see threading through each is really where I would come through. My cohesive body of work would come through. So first, I would say I am a poet. I'm really committed to doing methods such as auto theory, which I'll talk about more because that's really central, especially thinking about questions of desire and mental illness and ambiguity. I was talking to someone recently, and I don't mean this in an insulting way, but I think there's kind of two types of poets. There's poets that aim to communicate to others and say, this is my experience, and hoping to reach them that way. And I'm understanding communication here in a kind of classic sense of here's point A, and I just want to get to point B. And I'm not interested in communicating. I am interested in kind of using writing as a way to understand myself, but understand myself in a kind of plural sense. So when I'm writing, whether it be poetry or theory or a personal essay, I'm more just trying to first understand myself. I'm not really interested in communicating. I'm more interested in kind of opening a field. We could even use the language of portal here. Um, and that is why I kind of write in this automatic way where I don't really edit pretty much anything. I just kind of start at a random line. I don't write with intention either. I never say, I'm going to write a poem about disability justice today. Never done that in my life. I usually start with like 2 to 3 phrases, like something very kind of random. For example, like, 3 weeks ago, my niece is, she's young and she says outer space, like outer spaces. And I was like, outer spaces. I was like, I love that. I'm going to take that. And I just put it in my notes in my phone. And so I have all these notes in my phone of just random phrases that I'll just pick one day and I'll just kind of start playing off it. And then by the end of it, I will look at it for a few minutes and then I'll realize, oh, that's a poem about that part of my life. Oh, that's what I was saying there. And it's interesting that the more that I do that practice when I write poems to kind of open things up, the more that people connect with them.
Mm-hmm.
People tend to get kind of, I think, bored by poems that just try to communicate. If I said, hey, I'm, mentally ill, and here's my experience about it. I think there can be power in that, but it's just not my interest, for example.
Yeah, I
So
found that a lot of my favorite art is this kind of art, like you said, where the artist does the work and then kind of realizes what they were doing in the work kind of after the fact, not necessarily consciously like before or during the act.
Exactly. Yeah, it's definitely more kind of process oriented for sure. It reminds me of I actually have a book of her writing right here. Eva Hesse, the famous kind of minimalist post World War II artist, and all of her. We should find a photo of her work somewhere on the podcast. But all of her work is just like, you go into the gallery and you'll see like 3 strings hanging on the wall connected to like a ball, and then there's like some like spikes, and everyone's like, how is that art, right? People have that reaction, and I walk in, I'll just start crying. Like I always say, I'm that person that will cry in a white square in a gallery and not understand why. And I think that is kind of very much the art that I have gotten really interested in and connected to, even though I can appreciate other art. And the same with theory. I'm just not interested in being told what to think. Very much. Yeah, so that's the poetry side. That's what I do there. And then next is my like dissertation PhD research. I'm a PhD candidate, almost done, in literary studies and visual cultures at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. My dissertation, and this is when things get weird, is just a complete work on drone technology and understanding its role in domestic life in the US and the UK mainly. And looking at the psychological attachments between humans, the general public, and drones on a somewhat romantic, pleasurable, and like desirable level. And understanding how drone technologies have been kind of incorporated as what I'm theorizing as like virtual prosthetics or emotional prosthetics, to help people cope with domestic life and neoliberalism in various ways. So we have that one. So we go into robotics. And then I'd say my third area of work is really focusing on disability justice through various advocacy projects, especially neurodivergence and autistic people. And also through writing, working with nonprofits. And that I would say is kind of is my more like accessible and straightforward work where I am trying to communicate in that sense. And most of that, I'd say, most of that work does also come from an understanding of the what some would call the personal, and I would call kind of the plural or the collective.
And how did you find your way into each of these kinds of fields?
I've always been interested in poetry. Like the only one in my family. I started writing when I was probably 7 or 8. Always interested in like reading and literature and books. And I didn't have a lot of friends growing up, as I was very awkward, which I now just understand was because I was autistic and I had no idea. And but I became very interested in poetry because it seemed like the one thing in my life that didn't bore me. Not to sound kind of full of myself, but like school was always very easy. I didn't have to try. I could read something and understand it like very easily. My family was also pretty poor growing up, and my dad would clean apartments for money. And he would just bring home random books to teach me how to read, and they'd be law books and medical journals. So that's what I learned how to read off of. And so I was just so bored with all that. And I loved poetry because I didn't fully understand it. And I thought that was really powerful to admit I don't understand something, but I'm still going to write it and I'm still going to put it out there and communicate it, try to communicate it. I loved that. And I carried that through pretty much my whole life into college. And then when I got into college, I got really interested in it. And I did a bunch of workshops and classes. And now I'm still growing to be kind of established in poetry, but I have a collection that I'm moving around to publishers now. So it's getting there.
Excellent. And I don't know if you know, but there's a book called Rendering Unconscious as well. And it's almost sold out, and the hardbound's almost sold out. So we're going to do an expanded paperback edition soon. And it's Rendering Unconscious: Psychoanalysis, Politics, and Poetry. So if you would like to contribute some of your poetry to the Rendering Unconscious book, that would be fantastic.
I'd love to. That sounds fantastic. Yeah, I would love that. That's great. And I have one poem that is just about psychoanalysis and my attachment to my mother's womb and my sex life. So that sounds great.
Perfect.
That's always it's always a fun one. It's a crowd favorite. Yeah, no, I love that. And I also love that kind of concept of the book too. So often I think there's a misunderstanding of psychology as firmly in the social sciences and has nothing to do with art. At least that is how I see it happening in higher education. I don't know if you've kind of experienced those sort of boundary lines there.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And and for the most part, in psychology programs, I have my PhDs in psychology. They totally discount psychoanalysis, so now it's kind of only alive in the humanities, I think. But what Freud always said was everywhere I go, there's always been a poet that was there before me, and I always loved that line.
I love that. Yeah, I do love that, and especially when you read. I mean, so much of kind of the foundational psychoanalysis, we're deeply interested in language, and you see that interest going in and understanding how much our language kind of structures and also reveals our unconscious. It doesn't really seem like a natural connection now when you say it like that. He said something very smart though. Oh yeah, this is actually something I was thinking with today and kind of preparing for this talk with you, was the distinction between psychoanalytic practice and psychoanalytic theory. Mm-hmm. Because it's rather funny. I'm kind of famous for like grilling all of my therapists. I don't think they like me very much. But I always bring up psychoanalysis and therapy, and I'm like, this helps me understand myself and my situation and others, and they're always kind of giving me a side eye or kind of like, that doesn't work, or no one trusts that. And I didn't know if that was something that you knew about, because I've been thinking about how to balance kind of that distinction or tension in my own work.
Between psychoanalysis and kind of more straightforward therapies, or the
Yeah,
more
I guess it's
popular therapies
the the practice of psychoanalysis versus
versus the
psychoanalytic
theory.
theory, which I know some psychologists look at and they're like
Yeah, no,
very
they really
skeptical.
discounted it, and I think it's a real shame. The thing that I say first is that I'm so grateful to all the psychoanalytic theorists in the humanities and like in film, and literature, because everyone I talk to, that's like say under the age of like 35, they've all come to psychoanalysis through the humanities, and
Mhm.
yeah, so thank you all the professors for keeping psychoanalysis alive, because in mental health they've like completely tried to discount it and just like kill it basically. Yeah, so I'm glad that it's still alive in that way. But the thing that I've also heard from some people that did learn psychoanalysis like through the theory in university is that a lot of the people teaching the theory say that the practice is something that like is something they wouldn't do, or like they wouldn't recommend, or nobody really practices it. It's only good for theory. So to that I say, please don't tell people that.
Right.
Because it actually is a really great practice I found, and it's completely changed my life. So I'm glad that I found it.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I think the practice is really valid. I think what's happened is that the psychoanalytic institutes that train psychoanalysis have made it so kind of, obscure. And
Mhm.
it's like the institute I went to, for example, they only trained doctors, and most of those people were medical doctors. So it was people that didn't have any training in like psychological theory or psychoanalysis at all.
Yeah.
And they wouldn't even train psychologists if they could still do that. But there were a bunch of lawsuits like in the 1970s where psychologists had to like fight for their right to be able to still be psychoanalysts as well, because the medical field was just trying to completely get rid of anyone who wasn't a medical doctor that was a psychoanalyst. So there's been like so much politics within the field that's really like narrowed it down. And I think that's one of the biggest problems, because I found like they've tried to make rules like you're only in psychoanalysis proper if you're seeing someone like 4 to 5 times a week for an hour each day. And it's like that would be great if everyone could do that, but like who can do that, and like who's
Right.
going to pay for it? It's just like it's not realistic. And
Right.
I found that when people are in the process, especially if they are reading the theory and they're engaged in the process, if seeing someone once or twice a week is perfect, because it keeps you, in the process, and talking more often. And you can do writing, you can do free associative writing on your own, or think about your dreams and write those down and kind of do the work on your own in between sessions. And my goal when I do analysis with people is to try to help them do it as much as possible without me, so that way one day they can kind of end their formal analysis and just keep the process going on their own in their own lives.
Yeah. Yeah, that is so interesting that you kind of brought up those criticism and those points, because I think this is kind of partially where the disability justice work comes in, because I will say one sad thing is that psychoanalysis, at least in US universities and the humanities, is dying. I get a lot of criticism for even using it, or even reverting to it. And more, I don't see it being taught. I absolutely love my two mentors, Leslie Bowe and Jill Cassett, for fully encouraging me. And always, Jill Cassett really, I think, taught me psychoanalysis in a really important way. And I realized was foundational to my thinking. And I can share that story 'cause it's really funny. But but one thing that I was thinking about is how much psychology is, at least mainstream, is really moving towards this privatized, individualized, and medicalized model. And in some ways, I think criticisms of psychoanalysis, or the ways to push it away, are also some kind of internalized fear of the power of psychoanalysis.
Hmm.
Especially when, with psychoanalysis, it's like you're always, it doesn't end. right? It's like it's always the process. You're always working things out. And people don't like that. I think that there's a lot of pleasure in the kind of finality of this idea of, oh, I can, do therapy for 6 months and help my anxiety or get over my childhood trauma. And people, and I think this is kind of an internalized ableism where there's a general consensus that's like, that's really scary. It's really scary to also understand yourself, that there is parts of yourself you can never access and never know. And one of the other transformations, at least in the US, that we've in Western notions of psychoanalysis, is that it's been so focused on the ego, and it's been so misunderstood as a psychology of just the individual, and which is just like the biggest mischaracterization, because like psychoanalysis is all about the relational. It's never understood the self as a closed unit.
Mm.
It's never understood even the self as kind of plural or several, but always also outside of the self.
Mhm.
And I see this with other trends too, such as individualized medicine, personalized medicine, the dislike, this is really interesting, of group therapy. That's been really interesting to me. I did a lot of research on last summer how many people actually practice it and want to practice it, and now how it's been kind of demoted to the work of social workers, as if social workers are less capable or intelligent, so to speak. And I do kind of wonder if that is also part of this push away from psychoanalysis, of saying, one, that's just kind of like too powerful, it's too radical. And also, that doesn't fit with our neoliberal individualist agenda, where we're using, I would say, mental health and privatizing it and making it a personal problem. And also the whole biological, chemical imbalance notions there, making it a personal problem rather than understanding, mental health and psychology as this kind of relational field that we could. I'm very interested in like mad politics and understanding mental illness and neurodivergence as these connecting factors, rather than keeping things so private. And anyone that knows me or has seen me on social media knows I'm the first person to just share everything about my medical history. I have no boundaries in that, because I think it's really powerful, and I think it's important to deprivatize mental health in that sense. And you are helping me now think through how maybe the push away from psychoanalysis is part of that.
Yeah, I absolutely think you're right. And I think it is overwhelming for people. And when you do this, have the psychoanalytic process like going in your own mind, and when you do see like how pervasive all of these relations are and all of these systems have affected you and how much you've internalized from society, that can be very overwhelming as well, because you start seeing how much it permeates like every aspect of your life, and people don't want to see that, you know. They want to be like, in 6 to 10 sessions I can be fixed and happy, you know. It's like, not really, but it's a total illusion, and people shouldn't, we need to move away from people wanting that, because that is not realistic. It wouldn't be fun. It's not like, it's just not how people are. It's like you have to come to terms with the way people are, and it's not that.
Right. It's just kind of enforcing that other way of it's just kind of enforcing that repression. And I mean, this is also part of the way like mental illness and mental health has just been commodified. You can just do this package, you can get this package deal of therapy sessions, especially with the rise of talk therapy. I'm really interested in I want to do my second book on artificial intelligence in the use of therapy.
Mm-hmm.
Like the chatbots and everything, which all use CBT, CBT, and are just all based on this idea, really based on the main criticism of psychoanalysis, that that the human mind is just this compartmentalized thing that is universal, and we can just have these auto-generated responses for all of people's problems. which is like interesting in many ways to me, because I think one of the other issues with psychoanalysis is people, I mean, one of the criticisms of it, right, is that it's universalizing, it's generalizing. And in some ways, I'm like, yeah, I get that. But at the other times, it's like maybe a bigger fear is that we all actually are somewhat similar. Maybe I love what one of my students said this once, and I love them so much for it. It's like my first day teaching. And they were like, I think it's so weird everybody's obsessed with being an individual. And I love the way they said it. And I was like, you are so correct. The bigger fear is that like maybe we all are connected, you know. And
Yeah, interdependent.
Yeah, interdependence, right? Or like, would it be so horrible if all of our unconsciouses were structured the same? Um, you know, my mentor always says this, ask this question that I love. And whenever you bring up like a difference between, whenever I bring up a difference between subjects or topics or whatever, she'll always ask me, and she'll be like, what differences do these differences make? Which is, I think, just a wonderful question and a wonderful way of thinking about how we place values on certain differences in context, right? Like, of course, it's important that like I'm white and someone else is black. Like that difference is important, but perhaps there are some contexts where it's irrelevant. And thinking about that, I think, has been really helpful for me to kind of work through the criticisms of psychoanalysis and also just like channel through it.
Yeah, and I think in the States in particular, psychoanalysis kind of took this turn towards the individual and like away from its like trying to help the masses and being more political, and turned more to this ego psychology where people were focused on like having a healthy ego so you can basically like go to work and have your little family and your nuclear family and your perfect little life. But that's not really seen in other parts of the world. It's really like American psychoanalysis where that kind of happens, not surprisingly.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, as an American, we're really good at ruining things and making it about ourselves. That's kind of our trademark move. Yeah, but you raised I think so many like good points, and I think that this is something I'm trying to combat in my work, especially like my theoretical work. And I said this to my dissertation is about like robotics and human robot psychology and like some aspects of warfare, and then there's a whole chapter about pornography and how drones are used in it. It goes all over the place.
How are drones used in pornography?
Oh gosh, it's a whole genre. Amazing. Yeah. Oh, the drone porn is great. Yeah, first drones are used in porn. For filming, sometimes they're voyeuristic characters, like kind of watching the sex act. There's sex toys attached to them, and then the person is being penetrated by a drone. And I also just discovered there's like CGI drone porn, which really gets in depth, and it's just completely animated pretty much, but it's more realistic. There's also a phenomenon where another kind of drone porn where people masturbate to images of drone strike footage. So that's been what I've been kind of exploring. But as you can see, like there's so many interesting questions of pleasure there and of vulnerability, and also the rise of it. Just like I can kind of understand like why someone would want to have sex with like a sex robot, right? That looks human, usually presents as female, often Asian as well. And then someone that wants to have sex with a drone, which is this little quadcopter thing that represents militarism and warfare. So I got, kind of really interested in that genre. But I mentioned this to just mention, like, I have this dissertation that's sprawling out everywhere. And I said to my therapist a couple weeks ago, because he was like, oh, it would be inappropriate of me to read your, like, scholarly work. because I always talk about it and how I understand myself through it. And I was like, oh, my dissertation is literally a theory of myself. And he was like, how is that even possible? But it was really born from this ambiguity and this problem I couldn't kind of get out of my head, where I was trying to understand how I could watch my nephew play with a drone and find it very cute and find it very adorable and have fun playing with it with him. And then at the same time, how I could see kind of military footage of drone strikes and people being killed and civilians being killed, and hating that and finding that disgusting. So I was like, how does this technology make me hate it and also love it at the same time? And then trying to understand myself as not just this little individual unit, but in this, there's this Deleuzian line where he says, like, you always have to understand yourself, in the kind of, the theorist or the researcher needs to understand themselves within the field that they are kind of theorizing. So that's what I tried to do for the dissertation, is saying, where am I in this? Where's my subject position? And how am I part of this effective, kind of effective or emotional infrastructure that stretches across seas, that is determining who cares about what, why, how, and in what way? And kind of, I think important to this approach is I'm not interested in finding answers to anything. I don't believe it's possible. I'm not interested in like finitude. I'm more just kind of interested in exploring these relations between humans and drones and other technologies, understanding those emotional bonds and saying, what are these emotional bonds doing? Like, how are they affecting us? And the results I've found, I think, are pretty amazing, in terms of the ways that they are kind of feminizing, the ways that they are changing the bounds of sexuality. And especially, I think probably the most interesting is the ways that technologies, drones and other personal technologies, are making us so compliant with passivity and interdependency. And this is where my disability work comes in, really, and thinking about the ways that human ability is becoming devalued as we have these technologies that can do human abilities better and better. And then asking about how humans are kind of accepting that. So I always make this joke. I'm like, oh, look at my dissertation is all about how people are becoming, disabled queer women. Wow, what am I? A disabled queer woman. I'm like, isn't that funny? So I can see myself in my work, and other people just, it's very abstract, and they can't. But the more I present it, the more people do kind of find connections with themselves within it, which has been the most rewarding part for me.
Mm-hmm. And how did you get interested in drones specifically?
Oh, I come from a military police family. Not a big fan of the military and the police at all, but I did kind of grow up in that, and my family was all kind of Air Force and Marines, or just and also local police. So I always kind of grew up around like military technologies and this kind of consciousness of that, and deep consciousness of warfare. And I think really what became really interested for me is that, like, when I moved out of my house and I was kind of out of my parents' military mentality, and I'm not exactly sure what radicalized me, but one thing that always bothered me growing up is that my family was really, really proud to talk about how we're Italian, but we never talked about how we're actually more from Syrian descent than Italian descent. And we never talked about the Syrian side of my family. And it always kind of bothered me, especially because my family is not the most politically minded towards Arab and Islamic people. So it's like Islamic people, sorry, Muslims. Can't be an Islamic person, but but I was trying to understand this tension. It really bothered me. And then when kind of we had the Syrian uprisings and Syrian civil war started getting really prominent, I just kind of started reading about it and learning about it. And through that, I started really seeing the hyper presence of drone technology and the interest in it and the rise of it. And I think it was really through that. And that was part of the tension I was trying to understand. I was like, how can I think that this is cute and also kind of understand that, this technology is also kind of destroying this part of my heritage that my parents are also hiding. So there was this strange kind of situation of like hyper visibility of kind of cute drones in the US. And then there was this increasing, invisibility of drones abroad that I also kind of connected to my family life in many ways, of understanding what was being repressed in that really.
Yeah, and that's really psychoanalytic too. And that's another reason why I think it is really repressed in the States, because we do need to, as Americans, look into our history as people, as our personal histories, and also the history of the country and global history more. And America doesn't want to, I mean, it's being forced to, thankfully, but
Yeah.
it's really done a lot to try to keep repressing its history and its people's history, and a lot of people in the States are cut off from their family lineages, whether they came there, their families immigrated there because of famines or war, or they were stolen and brought there, or their land was ripped from under them. So there's just been so many tears
Yeah.
from ancestry and roots and family histories, and I think they come up in that way in people's interests and what people are searching and researching, and we might not even be aware of.
Yeah. Yeah. No, no, no. I think that's such kind of a beautiful way that you put this, right? We get this kind of mass repression, right, in the States, and we see this in other kind of colonialist empires as well, and imperial states. England is also very good at doing this. But what it made me, you know, like one, it's kind of this problem of kind of also getting back to the distaste for psychoanalysis of like, this basic idea of like to be uncomfortable, that's kind of impossible for people. Not impossible, but it's not seen as desirable. And I think a lot of ways that being uncomfortable, right, is so kind of pushed away, people don't want it, is that we also don't have the medical or supportive infrastructure for people to feel that discomfort.
Mm.
Of like, when can I do that? Even in my work, I'm extremely grateful that I have an advising team that will let me do this. Of saying, I'm gonna produce this theory and it's gonna be ambiguous. And that's the point. Whereas so many instructors are like, no, you need to have an answer. Or you need to have like a thesis, you need to have a solution to a problem. And I'm like, no, it's just the problem.
Mm-hmm.
Like so, you see that at so many scales happening, where there is always this push for finitude. And even if I think the states, or just kind of like, whiteness in general, really confronted its own discomfort and uncomfortable parts of its history, it's like we never get over that. It's like it's just something we have to learn how to deal with, and until we have the social infrastructure for it, I can't imagine it really happening on a wide scale.
Oh, that's a good point. And yeah, no, I love your not into finitude, because I am not either. I agree. I don't think it's possible. I think it's more about just like, asking these questions and, exploring things in creative ways. And sometimes I'll like run with a theory and idea that I have and just keep kind of pushing it and seeing where it goes. And I'm like, I don't, when I've been giving talks about something, I've been like, I don't know if I believe this. Like, I
Right.
believe this, but this is like where I went with it, where I could take it.
Yeah. It is. And I think that's so generative. And I think it's so kind of vulnerable and important. I love when I go to a talk and I ask a question and the speaker will be like, I don't know that. And I'm like, thank you for being honest. And rather than just making up some crap answer or having this kind of, this kind of academic ego that you really do know it all. And that's kind of another part where that discomfort comes up, right? Where like people don't actually want to be vulnerable on the page. And maybe, I don't know if you've come up in this, but I've come up in academia a lot, where whenever I do kind of bring kind of personal anecdotes, or I explicitly talk about myself in academic work, for a long time I was told that that was really selfish. And I was told that I was just taking the easy way out. So I just stopped doing it, of course. And I was like, oh, okay, that's not professional. I'm just not going to do it. All right, fine. And then one semester was an art history graduate class. And our assignment was just, all we had to do throughout the class was, do the readings and show up. And we all had to produce one question, just one question that drives us. We didn't have to answer it. Just one question, anything about art, whatever you want. So I was like, okay. So I brought in this presentation, and I, was giving the presentation. It was a presentation of 3 different artworks that I had seen in person that really captivated me, and I didn't understand why. And one was a depiction, this Georges Vallis painting of a kind of Holocaust survivor. What was the other one? Oh yeah, one was a Doris Salido sculpture, who kind of writes about the missing people of torture sites in Argentina. And then the third was this kind of abstract dance artist. I can't remember the name right now, but they did this abstract dance artist dance routine where they would go around the museum and they would be still, or they would be kind of just laying on the ground. There was a stillness and a passivity to it. And I just was so drawn to all of these in various ways. And I couldn't understand why. So I'm sitting in this seminar and everyone was kind of looking at me because I was just talking about how these 3 works were connected in a way that had nothing to do with me. It was all just like these 3 works have something in common. I couldn't figure out what it was. So I wanted to understand like the connections and this transhistorical sense of art and art history and like forms and stuff. And the professor, who is now my mentor, just looked at me and she was like, you're the connection. And I was like, what? I don't understand. And it was funny because the whole class was like yelling at me kind of, and I was like getting upset because I didn't get it. And they were like, no, like the answer is in you. You just can't feel it. And then my professor just gave me the Abraham Antorek book about the shell and the kernel of kind of, right, like this would be the kernel, which would be a kind of a part of the unconscious that absolutely drives me and drives my relations, but I can never get to it. I can never access it. And that really is where everything sprung, and I understood how powerful it could be if I really thought from the self and what I didn't know about the self to make these kind of connections that didn't make sense on the surface. And I really kind of loved that, of just demystifying these differences. And I discovered so much about myself in the writing of it, where I was like, oh, that's I think that's related to that trauma, or I think I understand why that speaks to me, at least not fully. And that really started driving my method. And it was extremely great to have that community in the seminar where they were supportive of it. They were like, we want you to be personal and understand that your personal is expansive. Your personal speaks to us. And that was so great. And I can't wait to be a professor so I can do that for people.
No, it's true. And like you said, like locating yourself within the field that you're thinking about or writing about or researching, it's important because, yeah, this idea of being objective, this objective reality that you're studying somehow is like that's not reality.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Yeah, I'm like, that's not reality. But there is of course, that once again, like there's the comfort of just having this nice little art object that you examine and you figure out everything about it and you write your paper and you submit it and you're done. And I think the other part of me was like, I was just so distraught, and I still am at times, about like, what's the utility of theory or scholarship? And those those nice little answers that people would make, these kind of this finitude scholarship, it never seemed to offer anything to like the ongoing and explicit problems within and outside academia. So I've also been trying to kind of bridge that gap in some ways between academia and activism, which is definitely hard, especially when you are someone who kind of works in these like abstract critical theories. But I think that I see it more on micro scales, especially the way many justice and rights movements are often kind of hyper focused on the individual and hyper focused on identity politics, which is definitely a tough one to work through, because so many people live their lives by identity politics, but at the same time we get trapped in them so often that it really doesn't allow the kind of radical change that we so desperately need.
Do you want to talk a little bit more about your activism?
Sure, I'm happy to. I think I, like many other people, fell into activism. Most people, I don't think, go into it because I want to help people. They go into it because they realize they're being marginalized or oppressed in some way. And I really got interested in activism when I first got away from my family, and I started to kind of realize the effects of growing up in this very military driven, conservative, Blue Lives Matter family. And I started to realize the effects of that on me and my thinking, and I was, getting really disturbed by that, of course. So that was one way, but it really started actually when I was in a disability studies seminar, and I didn't identify as disabled. I didn't think about that at all. Like, even though I had an eating disorder since I was the age of 8, like PTSD, depression, anxiety, chronic pain issues. I had all that stuff, and I knew I did, but I didn't identify as disabled. And when I got into this seminar, it was really important because a few weeks in, I started actually I saw myself in the scholarship, and I could finally have a vocabulary to understand my experience. And once I understood my experience and what had been happening to me and what had been happening to people like me, I was like, holy shit, this is why my life sucks. And I was like, this is why my life is so miserable. Like, this is why I'm not happy. And I couldn't realize how many various oppressive systems, especially academia, especially the medical system, were deeply, deeply impacting my quality of life. Mm-hmm. And once I got interested in that, I saw it everywhere, especially, in other people's lives and other kind of other ways that like disability justice is still kind of really fully reaching. I'm like, like this mentally ill grad student. Okay, that's fine. But then there's people in institutions. And trying to kind of think about those connections and the different, I don't want to say levels of disability because that's gross. But like the different various types of kind of disability justice issues. And that was really important for me to have that framework. And once I got into it and I realized I always think my greatest skill is writing. I think that's the best thing I can give to the world. That's where I feel like I have the most power. And I was like, how can I use my writing to connect to people? So I started writing a lot, and I had all this, I have an English PhD. Like I can, I know all the tools and I know the language. I know how to distribute scholarship. So I became really kind of visible in public with that and vocal about my disability justice interests and works and initiatives, and people took notice really fast. And I'm forever grateful for that. In terms of the nonprofits I've reached out with, the expansive community I have made, I've really, I think, made like my best friends through this work. And the more I got interested in it, the more I learned not only like about myself, but about different forms of justice and the intersectionality of it. and I became really angry. There's my friend Haley Moss, she makes this joke of like, nobody wants to become the angry disabled person, but we all need to be. And I loved that because I very much became the angry disabled person and became very loud about it. And as of late, I think my biggest commitments have been focusing on academic ableism. And to be completely honest, probably the only reason I'm staying in academia is to improve it at this point, um, through teaching and through scholarship, and trying to transform it in various ways so it can actually be sustainable. It was probably it's still the most disabling experience of my life, without question. So I guess that's how I got pissed off. I guess that's how I got into activism, like everybody else.
Yeah, and like you said, and seeing how much it affects your life, because I think it's not framed that way, and a lot of people see, different politics going on as something that's like, like I have some friends back in Florida still that are just like, whoever's president, my life, I still have to pay my taxes, my life is shit either way, it's just like very, having a lot of difficulties either way, and not really seeing any avenues for improvement no matter what they do. So I think that the more activism can help change situations and impact people's lives in various ways, definitely the better, because these politics affects us all to the core for our whole lives.
Right. Yeah, I think it gets back to that earlier, the earlier thing we discussed too, of like, you have so many things are classified as just like individual personal problems. And that's kind of also how I was treated in graduate school, of people saying, you're such a bad writer, you'll never graduate. And I was like, oh. And I was like, well, maybe that's just a problem with your standard of writing. That's what I would say now. Or the ways that I was kind of criticized for having like, I'm not criticized, but like a few people tried to kind of push me out of academia when I had various relapses with anorexia. And I was like, why wouldn't you just support me? Why wouldn't you just realize this institution partly drove me to do that, largely drove me to have those relapses? And I think that's what I honestly loved so much about disability studies. And I'm grateful I got kind of into like critical theories, because it really helped me see this wider network that we're all part of. And one of the biggest, I think, issues of so many graduate programs in the humanities now is that they love to teach us critical theory, and they never encourage us to apply critical theory to our own lives. And that's what I started doing. And it's honestly, it's trippy. It's trippy when you're in Target and you're like trying to situate yourself in like a Deleuzian framework. It messes with your head. But it's also, I think, one of the most kind of powerful things to really self-apply theory and understand yourself within it, because then you realize, like, at least I did, then I realized like all of the things I was blaming myself for were largely not my fault. They were all external factors, and that was really empowering, and has given me so much motive to like finish grad school. And I mean, so my first year of grad school, I had like no confidence, and I was like just like crying all the time. And now it's great because people are intimidated of me because I'm so confident, and I love that. I'm like, okay, I made a good move.
Yeah, but that's definitely part of how this like white cis hetero Christian patriarchal system works too, is to always put the focus on you as the individual and your problem, whether it's your biology or you're not strong enough, you need to pull yourself up by the bootstraps and all of this, and always putting the focus on that and not the systemic issues that have caused these issues in the first place.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like so ironic when you're in academia too, and you're like, you're teaching me about systemic issues and telling me we're all involved in them, but then you're not treating me like we're also in an oppressive system. And kind of bringing that consciousness aware to people has really been helpful. I love doing that in class with students. It's always fun when I just start criticizing the university, and they all usually really empathize with it, and
Appreciate it, I'm sure.
yeah, it also just makes learning better because there's so much less pressure on them. Where, it's like, I'm like, okay, we have this deadline for a paper. And I was like, I didn't make this deadline. It's a university deadline. If you don't have the paper finished, it's fine. You can't write at a certain arbitrary pace.
Yeah, exactly. Who's made all of these rules?
Yeah, none of the rules make sense. Wasn't it, I think originally it was like the academic and like educational calendar year was just built off of farming cycles. Right, it's like I was like, oh, we need labor in the summer months in the spring to harvest, so kids got to be at school. I'm like, but yeah, a little outdated.
Yeah, a little.
Little outdated. It's like I like summer, but even 9 months a year is just unsustainable at the rate that they put it.
No. And it also goes back to what you're talking about in the beginning between like the theory and the praxis, the practice of psychoanalysis or practicing putting critical theory into work in your own life, versus just the theory.
Yeah. Yeah, right. And it's scary and it's intrusive. But I think that's part of like responsibility if you're going to be any kind of researcher or academic. It's like you have to be actively understanding that you're going to change yourself through that. Like if you don't become like a better person through like your research or your academia, I'm like, what are you doing? You're not raising your own consciousness. I'm like, you got some problems there. And you do meet all these like horrible people in academia, and you're like, how did you get this far?
Yeah, that's the problem too, is it's become like just a business and people trying to jockey for position and have status and get their tenure, get the job, and put people below them rather than trying to kind of help everyone learn and think and raise everyone up, in that way.
Yeah, right. The neoliberalization of the university. It is always funny to me too when you kind of read the kind of fake university missions that are always about like democracy or raising public awareness. My favorite is the UW, my university's kind of slogan or mantra, which is just forward, which just means we're always kind of going towards this progressive stance. And I'm like, then why are you cutting all the humanities and only funding science? I'm like, where are we going? Because we're stagnant. But that's, I think, such like a long kind of battle. The slow death of the humanities and funding STEM. But now that we have so many more remote technologies, I think we're going to see it at a really increased pace of how much funding is going to be cut.
Yeah.
Or programs are going to be closed.
Sad.
Yeah, it is. It's very sad. I think that's part of the reason I've been so heavily invested in kind of working with STEM, not for job security, but just making those connections with like other engineers and scientists has been really amazing. And you'd be surprised how open they are to thinking with humanities. I always talk with one nurse who I kind of mentor through her graduate career. And that has been really generative because she's so open to thinking about disability justice and thinking about systemic issues and integrating them into her work. And it's the same too when I meet with roboticists. Like they're not unaware of social issues. They're totally aware. They just don't know how to incorporate those tools and those ideas in their work. And the more that we make those connections, I think the more kind of potential we have to maybe subversively integrate the humanities, even if it's being killed, into like science and technology fields.
Yeah, I like that. That's how I feel about psychoanalysis. I try to slide it in other ways.
Yeah, it's like, don't say the word because people freak out. Right,
just slide the ideas in there and people are like, oh yeah, that makes sense, and I'm like, it does, doesn't it? Oh, do you see that at play in your own life?
Such a great if like academia doesn't work, I wanna just become a therapist probably, and like work in prisons. But I feel like that would be such a cool model, right? Where you're this like it's not ethical, but you're a therapist and you say you do CBT, but like really everyone comes to you for like under the table psychoanalysis. If you can't, right, it's like so hard to practice it. I tried to find a psychoanalysis who would in the area, and the only one, there was like one. It was so expensive, wasn't covered by insurance, and I was like so bummed out. But we'll see.
No, that's why I think technology is really going to do well with psychoanalysis, though, because it isn't covered, you know, I mean, if you see a medical doctor who is also a psychoanalyst, then it could be covered, but generally insurance doesn't cover psychoanalysis. And so because it's like kind of been pushed out of the medical system anyway, I think it's like the perfect kind of treatment to kind of take on the new technology. And, you know, everyone's been doing remote therapy anyway since the pandemic's been happening. And I think it could totally like kind of corner that market in some ways, besides the chatbots. But, you know, because it is kind of deregulated and it's not integrated in the system, so it can work more kind of experimentally in that way.
Yeah, it could be so much more fluid. And one thing too about the rise of like online therapy, I mean, you know, I'm deeply uninterested in the kind of major what is it, like Talkspace, that's like the big one, right? The kind of texture therapist stuff. You know, I'm deeply, knowing how much I know about those models, like deeply uninterested in them. But I do think there's a great way that I've seen many therapy programs, you know, pop up now that do work on a subscription model and still have really affordable rates, actually, even with you know, like the same as what you would pay as a copay with insurance. And that would absolutely be the site to, I think, implement those kinds of to implement psychoanalysis. I helped a friend the last year actually start a business, start a completely online therapy practice, psychology practice. And I will say one thing that was really difficult about it was not only the ridiculous costs of it, but also getting the licensing together for like working across states and everything. And there's more and more boundaries put up for it. So I'd be interested in really thinking about where we can do more kind of like deregulated psychoanalysis, you know, besides the humanities.
Exactly.
To integrate that to people. Yeah, I'm gonna think on that now, like where I can bring that in. I love it.
Great. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about before we close up? Is there anything you wanted to mention we didn't get to?
Good question. Nothing in particular comes to mind. I would say that. I'd say, like, you know, of course, thank you so much. Everyone take care of themselves, take care of other people. And I guess let's just do the kind of classic pandemic move of let's just move, let's just keep getting through it.
Yeah, exactly. And I want everyone to follow you on Twitter and Instagram. Because
Thank you. Yes, I'm very funny on Twitter, everyone.
Yeah, and you're really thoughtful. Like, I love how you respond to different issues and current events that are happening, always so thoughtfully. And everybody that writes to you in your threads, you always like talk to everyone, and like it feels like you really read them and like think about what everybody's saying, and it's really
I really do love
refreshing.
Yeah, I do. I feel like there'd be another meeting where we just talk about how much I believe in virtual relations versus the physical, but I firmly support like internet friendships, just as valid. The virtual is real. Absolutely.
Absolutely. And then of course, you know, anytime when your book comes out or anything like that that you want to come back, you just let me know and come back and talk more.
Thank you. Yes, and I'm gonna follow up with you because I'd love to have a piece in the poetry collection too.
Yes.
Yeah, that sounds so fun. I love it.
Perfect.
Excellent. All right.
Thank you for listening to Rendering Unconscious. You've just heard a discussion with Amy Gaeta. For more, follow her on social media at Twitter at Gaeta Amy, at GaetaAmy, and follow her website aegaeta.wixsite.com. Links to everything can be found in the text accompanying this episode. Rendering Unconscious is also a book. Rendering Unconscious, Psychoanalytic Perspectives, Politics, and Poetry. From Trapart Books, 2019. For more, please visit our publisher's website, trapart.net. That's TRAPART.net. You can support the podcast by visiting our Patreon, patreon.com/VANESSA23CARL. Your support is greatly appreciated. A vehicle who comprehended the key, which means mental, is from the accumulation of energy that must have met some previous, outrageous though it is. Look, I am a master now. The two act as one. This they did with a will, but the further down they dug, 4 brothers set to work at once. Then we will dig you out, said her father, and bade decode my work. Ring for a moment. I don't write that way. Individual, and I won't. The one of its 10 sentences to translate. Relaxed atmosphere, and how he usually showed. Enter it up. Expert on new fluid. Might find out. Meditation and focus. Is just mantric techniques. This is Austin Osman. Partly I was scared development that somebody of an I confessed. My 15 years of service, what a small town to the corporation, and by I may justifiably say I have never before tally so charged residual secretions form the direct and vaginal they desire never of the ideal true for the and thought also of making a highly visually stones were arriving creativity for the insanity spheres of an election where the previous and the decadent until it runs out literary of change and literal coexistence. When I die, moving faster here than we anticipated, maybe someone will try to procedural exception. One college says to another, the trial was among divisions within each attorneys college asked for this variation indicates we think that separate long norms then cut off the scores should be established. The anthology I was struck by was accessible. Their treasures to be stored. How direct in the people of good as a whole to deal. Believe with poetry that a miracle would save them. Try and succeed. Hell, believe me. for Jessica.